A jaguar and a leopard look almost identical. Put photographs of the two animals side by side, and most people cannot tell them apart. Both have spotted rosette coats. Both are powerfully built ambush predators. Both are roughly the same size. The jaguar lives in South and Central America. The leopard lives in Africa and Asia. That geographic separation and those obvious physical similarities led scientists for a long time to assume the two cats were close relatives, something like cousins, or perhaps a single species that had spread across the world and diverged slightly in different environments. The DNA comparison produced a different answer. The jaguar's closest living relative is not the leopard. It is the lion. That single result captures what the full genetic comparison of every big cat species on Earth kept producing. A family tree where the animals that look most similar to each other are often not the ones most closely related. Appearance, it turned out, is a consistently unreliable guide to ancestry in this group of animals. The genome tells a different story almost every time. The comparison covered 8 species. The 5 classic big cats of the genus Panthera, lion, tiger, leopard, jaguar, and snow leopard. The cheetah, which is in its own genus and is the only surviving member of its lineage in the Old World. The puma, known in North America as the mountain lion or cougar. And the clouded leopard, a medium-sized cat from the forests of Southeast Asia that carries one of the most misleading names in the animal kingdom. All 8 species, all their genomes, one comparison. The results took years to fully work through and required multiple studies, with each new data set revising and sharpening what the previous one had found. What emerged was a complete rewrite of the big cat family tree. The first finding was about origins, and it placed all 8 species in the same starting location. Every big cat alive today traces back to a common ancestor that lived in Asia roughly 10 to 11 million years ago. Not Africa, which is where most people associate lions and the broader cat family, and not South America, which is where jaguars live today. Asia. The ancestor was a medium-sized predator living in the forests and open woodlands of what is now Central or East Asia, and its descendants spread outward from there over millions of years, crossing land bridges, following prey populations, and diversifying into the animals we recognize today. Lions reached Africa. Jaguars crossed into the Americas. Snow leopards stayed in the mountains of Central Asia. Tigers spread across the continent. All of them started in the same place. The migration story that the DNA reconstructed was more complex than a simple radiation outward from a single point. Different lineages moved at different times, through different routes. Tigers spread east and west across Asia in multiple waves, with populations separating and reconnecting as climates shifted and land bridges opened and closed. Lions made it into Europe before reaching Africa. Fossil evidence shows lions living across southern Europe and into Britain during warm periods of the Ice Ages, and the DNA confirms that European cave lions were part of the same lineage as modern African lions, not a separate species. Jaguars reached North America long before they got to South America, and the South American jaguar is descended from a North American population that moved south when the two continents connected about 3 million years ago. Every big cat species has a migration history embedded in its genome, and the comparison allowed researchers to read them all simultaneously. The clouded leopard branched off first, separating from the rest of the big cats around 6 million years ago. For a long time, the clouded leopard was treated as a single species with a range stretching from the Himalayan foothills across Southeast Asia to the islands of Borneo and Sumatra. The DNA comparison revealed there were actually two separate species, the mainland clouded leopard and the Sunda clouded leopard, which lives on Borneo and Sumatra, had been separated long enough to be genetically distinct animals. They looked identical. Their calls were identical. Their behavior was identical. Only the DNA saw the difference. Two species had been living as one in the scientific literature for over a century, and nobody had noticed because there was no visible way to tell them apart. The discovery of two clouded leopard species had immediate practical consequences. Conservation programs that had been treating the two animals as a single species needed to be restructured. Captive breeding programs that had been mixing mainland and Sunda clouded leopards in zoos, on the assumption that they were the same animal, were inadvertently producing hybrids between two distinct species, reducing rather than preserving the genetic integrity of both. DNA had revealed not just a biological fact, but a conservation error that was actively happening. After the clouded leopard split, the remaining big cats continued to diversify. The next branch to separate produced the snow leopard, and what the DNA showed about that separation became one of the most discussed results of the whole comparison. The snow leopard lives in the mountain ranges of Central Asia, the Himalayas, the Tibetan Plateau, the Altai. It has a thick, pale coat, a long, heavy tail it uses for balance on rocky terrain, and enormous paws that act like natural snowshoes. It looks, in almost every respect, like a high-altitude version of a leopard. The name snow leopard was not an accident. Everyone who looked at it assumed it belonged somewhere near the leopard in the family tree. The DNA placed it next to the tiger. The snow leopard and the tiger are each other's closest living relative. The two species split from a shared ancestor roughly 2 to 3 million years ago, long after the snow leopard's lineage had already separated from leopards and lions. The resemblance to the leopard, the spotted coat, the overall body plan, is convergent evolution, the same solution arrived at independently in response to similar environmental pressures. The snow leopard looks like a leopard because mountain environments favor similar physical traits, not because the two animals share recent ancestry. Underneath the appearance, the genome says tiger. The snow leopard result also reframed how researchers understood the animal's biology. Snow leopards are unusual among big cats in several ways. They are the only panthera cat that cannot roar, producing instead a range of calls, including a chuffing sound more typical of smaller cats. They are more solitary than lions and less territorial than leopards. Their prey consists largely of blue sheep and ibex in mountain environments, where few other large predators operate. For a long time, these characteristics were seen as adaptations to high-altitude isolation that the snow leopard had developed independently. The tiger connection changed the framing slightly. The snow leopard and tiger share traits that the other panthera cats do not, including certain skull proportions and aspects of their hunting behavior, and the DNA now provides a reason why those shared traits exist. They inherited them from a shared ancestor, rather than arriving at them independently. The jaguar result followed a similar pattern, but produced an even more striking disconnect between appearance and ancestry. Jaguars and leopards are the two spotted big cats. Both use the same rosette pattern for camouflage. Both are ambush predators that hunt in dense vegetation. Both are similarly sized. The assumption of close relationship was so strong that for much of the history of taxonomy, researchers debated whether the jaguar was simply an American variant of the leopard lineage, or perhaps that leopards and jaguars had a common spotted ancestor that was distinct from lions and tigers. The genome comparison answered that question precisely. Jaguars and lions share a common ancestor that lived more recently than the ancestor shared by jaguars and leopards. The jaguar lineage crossed from Asia into North America over the Bering Land Bridge and then spread south through the Americas, while the lion lineage moved into Africa. They ended up on opposite sides of the world with completely different appearances and ecologies, but the DNA preserved the record of their shared origin. The spotted coat of the jaguar and the spotted coat of the leopard evolved independently in two separate lineages. They are not the same spots. The cheetah result was not about relationships between species. It was about what happened within the cheetah species itself, and it produced one of the most striking numbers in the entire comparison. When researchers measured the genetic diversity within the cheetah population, how different individual cheetahs were from each other at the level of the genome, the number they got was extraordinarily low. Cheetahs living in East Africa, cheetahs in Southern Africa, cheetahs in Iran, all of them were nearly genetically identical. The variation that normally accumulates between individuals in a healthy population over thousands of generations was almost entirely absent. Two cheetahs from opposite sides of the continent were more similar to each other genetically than two wolves from the same pack or two lions from the same pride. The explanation is a population crash. Sometime around 10,000 years ago, at the end of the last ice age, the cheetah went through a period of near extinction. The population collapsed to very low numbers, possibly just a few hundred or even fewer individuals. Everything alive today is descended from that small surviving group, and the genetic consequences of that collapse are still visible in every cheetah alive. The population recovered in terms of numbers over the following thousands of years, but the genetic diversity that was lost during the crash cannot be recovered. It is gone. The practical consequences of that lost diversity are visible in cheetah biology today. Cheetahs have unusually high rates of sperm abnormalities. Around 70% of sperm in an average male cheetah is malformed, far higher than in other big cats. They are unusually susceptible to disease. When a pathogen spreads through a cheetah population, it tends to move quickly and affect most individuals similarly, because most individuals carry similar immune system genes. Skin grafts between unrelated cheetahs are accepted without rejection at rates normally seen only between close relatives, because at the genetic level, every cheetah effectively is a close relative of every other one. The cheetah's genetic uniformity also creates a vulnerability that researchers have identified as a long-term problem for the species. Most large predators carry enough genetic variation that if a new disease or parasite emerges, some individuals will have immune system variants that allow them to survive, and the population can recover. The cheetah has very little of that buffer. The immune system genes across the cheetah population are nearly identical, which means a pathogen that can overcome one cheetah's defenses can potentially overcome almost every cheetah's defenses. The same near-extinction event that the cheetah survived 10,000 years ago would be far more dangerous today, because the reservoir of immune variation that might allow some individuals to resist a new threat has already been depleted. The question of why the cheetah crashed 10,000 years ago is not fully resolved. The end of the last ice age brought rapid changes in climate and habitat, and the large prey species that cheetahs depended on, giant horses, giant deer, and other megafauna, disappeared across much of Eurasia and the Americas during the same period. Human hunting pressure may also have played a role. The cheetah that survived was, in genetic terms, a narrow slice of what had existed before, and every cheetah alive today is the descendant of that narrow slice. The puma, the same animal called a mountain lion in the United States and a cougar in Canada, produced a result that surprised researchers focused on the geographic question of how big cats spread into the Americas. The puma lives across an enormous range from the Canadian Yukon all the way down to the southern tip of South America, making it the most widely distributed wildcat in the Western Hemisphere. It looks, broadly, like a large, tawny cat, not spotted, not striped, built for running and leaping. The expectation was that it would sit near the jaguar in the family tree, since the two species arrived in the Americas around the same time and from the same Asian ancestors. The DNA placed the puma's closest relative not in the Americas at all, but in Africa, the cheetah. The puma and the cheetah share a common ancestor more recently than either shares with lions, tigers, leopards, or jaguars. Both lineages trace back to an Asian origin, but the puma's direct relatives were part of a group that included cheetah ancestors before that group split, one branch heading into the Americas to become pumas and jaguarundis, another staying in the Old World and eventually producing the cheetah. The puma and the cheetah are each other's closest living relatives across an ocean, with no geographic overlap and no obvious physical similarity to suggest the connection. Lions and leopards, the two African big cats that everyone assumes are closely related, turned out to share a more recent common ancestor than most other Panthera pairs. But the timing of that split was still surprisingly recent. The two species diverged from a shared ancestor roughly 2 million years ago, which is geologically recent. In evolutionary terms, lions and leopards are new. Anatomically modern humans appeared only about 300,000 years ago, and yet the ancestor shared by lions and leopards is only about 6 to 7 times older than that. The two species have had only a relatively short time to become as different as they are, which is why they still overlap so much in habitat and prey and behavior. The tiger, which the DNA placed as the earliest branching member of the Panthera group after the snow leopard split, turned out to carry the most complex genetic history of any big cat. Researchers found evidence throughout the tiger genome of ancient mixing events, periods in the past when different tiger populations that had been separated came back into contact and interbred, leaving genetic signatures that could be detected millions of years later. The tiger is not a clean lineage that stayed separate and diverged in isolation. It is a patchwork of different histories, accumulated over millions of years of movement across Asia. The tiger's complex history also showed up in its subspecies. Researchers used the genome comparison to assess which tiger subspecies were genuinely distinct enough to be treated as separate conservation units. The results were not what the traditional classification had suggested. Some populations that had been treated as separate subspecies were found to be genetically very similar, while others that had been lumped together were found to be more distinct than expected. The Amur tiger of the Russian Far East, the Bengal tiger of India, the Sumatran tiger of Indonesia, each carries a different history encoded in its DNA, a record of how tiger populations moved across Asia over the past million years, and how long each population has been isolated from the others. What the full comparison produced, taken as a whole, was a correction to one of the most persistent errors in how people think about animal relationships: the idea that animals that look alike are related, and animals that look different are not. Every major result in the big cat DNA comparison violated that assumption. The snow leopard looks like a leopard and is related to tigers. The jaguar looks like a leopard and is related to lions. The puma looks nothing like a cheetah and is related to cheetahs. The clouded leopard looked like one species and was actually two. The reason the assumption keeps failing is that big cats have been solving the same basic set of problems: how to catch fast prey, how to stay hidden, how to survive in cold or hot or wet or dry environments, for millions of years across multiple continents. The solutions converge. A spotted coat works for camouflage in dappled forest light, whether you are a jaguar in Brazil or a leopard in Kenya. And the fact that both cats arrived at that solution tells you nothing about whether they share an ancestor who also had spots. The genome cuts through the surface and shows the actual history. There is one more thing the comparison revealed that does not fit neatly into any single species result. When researchers looked at the overall pattern of how big cat lineages related to each other, they found evidence that some of the ancient splits had been followed by periods of contact and interbreeding. The genomes of several big cat species carry traces of DNA from other lineages, fragments that do not match the primary family tree and can only be explained by mixing events that happened millions of years ago. Lions carry traces of leopard ancestry. Tigers carry traces of what may be an extinct cat lineage. Jaguars carry signals from multiple ancient mixing events that happened as their ancestors moved through different parts of the Americas. The big cat family tree is not a set of clean, separate lines. It is a web of lineages that split apart, diverged, occasionally came back into contact, mixed, and then separated again, each mixing event leaving a trace that genomics can now detect and read. 8 species. One comparison. A family tree that nobody had correctly drawn before, and a set of findings that collectively made the same point. The history of this group of animals is written in their DNA, and it has very little to do with what they look like.